For those of you who've taken a look at some of the videos that I've put together on the installation of an aftermarket audio system in my Audi RS Q3, you'll have seen me from the early days of setting up the subwoofer, playing around with the JL Audio VX800i amplifier, setting it up in a room, working on the software, thinking about the crossover, then moving into actually installing the system in the car, and some discussion about how to actually tune the system. Recall that what I did was I used the computer, sent a signal from the computer into the amplifier through an optical cable, and then sent the output to the speakers and then measured the response using a microphone. So actually that didn't involve the head unit at all. That involved just the computer and the amplifier and how the car's internal acoustics were operating. But I also wanted to know whether the head unit was performing reasonably linearly or not in terms of the frequency response. And so I decided to check that out. And how did I do that? Well, what I did was I played pink noise from a file in the head unit, and instead of playing it through the speakers, what I did was I took the pre-amplifier output from the amplifier and then took that into the sound card and then onto the computer. When you involve the head unit in the process, this is what you get, right? So compare that to the more linear response. This is a loopback on the computer using just pink noise, and you get basically more or less a straight line. You get a boost in the bass. There's a hump here at between 1 and 2 kilohertz, and then there's a boost in the treble. So sort of in some way some sort of loudness function that's occurring. And of course Audi, when they were tuning that unit, were tuning this Delphi head unit for the speakers that they had in the car, and they've obviously decided to make some adaptation to the sound profile from the unit. Similarly, I was able to look at the rear speakers, and you see again there's a little bit of bass boost, a little bit of this hump in between 1 and 2K, and then a little bit of a boost. It's not the same as the front speakers, so there's some different profile there, slightly different profile. There's a little bit of a difference here in this mid region. But interesting. And the subwoofer, well, I mean, you might expect that. The subwoofer is attenuated as the frequency goes up. So this is the signal that comes out of the speaker lines from the head unit. So we're seeing an attenuation of the bass output from the subwoofer channel, and also it's attenuated at low frequencies a little bit. So it's really operating in sort of 30 to 80 hertz, which is, I think, is fair enough, right? So that's what you expect. So what I then wondered was, is there anything dynamic going on? In other words, does the output profile of the head unit change as a function of volume? So I decided to check that out. So what I did was I looked at the volume at 5, when the volume control was set at 5, then 10. Now obviously I've overlaid these because of course one was higher than the other originally, but I've made these the same place on the chart so you can see the difference in the bass and the treble frequencies. And then 15, and then 20. And you can see that as you turn the volume control up, it winds back the bass boost and the treble boost. And actually that's kind of a little bit in line with what occurs in the Fletcher-Munson curves, which are to do with how the human ear perceives different frequencies at different volume. And this is a Fletcher-Munson curve here, and it's sort of equal loudness curve. So if we take a look at these red lines, you see these are supposed equal loudness curves, and at low volume the ear is much less sensitive to bass and treble frequencies. So what that means is that you have to play a louder 100 hertz signal compared to a 1000 hertz signal for it to be perceived at the same volume. And then also, and similarly, a 10k versus 1000k, it has to be louder to sound the same as 1000 hertz. What happens, particularly to the ear, as the volume of the sound increases, or the volume of the sound spectrum increases, is that those curves flatten out. You see, it's flattening out here. And what that means is actually that the ear becomes more equally sensitive to volume across the hearing range as the volume is increased. For people who remember hi-fi units that had loudness controls on them, the loudness control actually really is adapting the sound output so that at low listening levels you could get a better sounding system by pressing the loudness button, which produces more bass and more treble. But often one would find when you turn the volume up, you have to switch the loudness button off, and it's exactly for this reason here. that you see the non-linearity in the response of the human hearing as a function of volume. So for example, when you have a low volume, so for example when the volume is set more like at 5, actually ear's a bit less sensitive to bass and a bit less sensitive to treble. So what they've done is that they've boosted these frequencies. But as the volume increases, say if you put the volume right up to 20, the sensitivity is similar at about 1,000 hertz as it is at around 100 to 80 hertz in the bass region, and yeah, somewhat less sensitive at higher frequencies. So, well, clearly the head unit is undertaking some dynamic DSP. So I have, of course, now with this information taken a look at this, and I've done a little bit of volume matching to try and match the particular curve in the Audi head unit. Where did that sit? How did the rate of change match up with these Fletcher-Munson curves, or the ISO curves, with the volume in the head unit? Actually, I wasn't very far off, to be honest, with ear. So obviously I've been able to take account of some of these anomalies using some additional EQ settings. And I've been doing some measurements by playing pink noise in the car and making adaptations. And so, yeah, I guess I could put a link to the current version of the Tune Audio file that addresses these issues.